It's time for mainstream madness.
So let's look at how you can reduce blood sugar spikes with resistant starch.
It is amazing the hoops that people jump through just to be able to try and eat the carbs without a blood glucose spike.
The types of food that raise your blood sugar, that's your blood glucose, the most, are going to be the carbohydrates. You have regular starch and you have resistant starch.
Resistant starch is a lot like fiber in that we don't break it down, we can't digest it. By definition, it resists digestion. If we can't absorb any nutrition through the small intestine, then why are we consuming it?
The great thing about resistant starch is that your body can't break it down to release the glucose.
So the starch we can break down and digest is potentially a problem because it raises blood sugar, but the starch we can't digest and break down properly is better because it doesn't raise our blood glucose. Think about that.
So the resistant starch stays in your gut and it behaves like fiber. It feeds the good bacteria in your gut.
Obviously, this is the case because once it hits the colon, we partially ferment this stuff, both the fiber and the resistant starch, to generate short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, propionate. But if this is so important, we do actually derive short-chain fatty acids like isobutyrate, isopropionate, valerate from animal proteins. And when we are in nutritional ketosis, we are feeding all of our gut, all of our colonocytes that line the colon, no problem. And so we don't need things like fiber and resistant starch in our diet for that benefit.
Foods that contain a lot of resistant starch include Irish potatoes, sweet potatoes, yam, green bananas, green plantains, beans and peas, and tiger nuts. But unfortunately, once you cook these foods, you destroy the resistant starch in them. But after cooking your potatoes, rice and pasta and other starchy foods in water, something interesting happens. When you cool these foods in the fridge overnight, some of the regular starch that would raise your blood sugar gets turned into a different type of resistant starch. And then if you heat up these foods and cool them again, you get even more of this resistant starch.
Wow, so let's cook our food, our starchy carbs, over and over again, letting it cool down in between so we can produce something we can't digest. Or we could eat species appropriately and never have to worry about our blood glucose, type 2 diabetes, or body composition.
So although resistant starch has some sort of science behind it, the actual effects on your body and your blood glucose can be tested, and many people have. In fact, the video from Serious Keto did it with potatoes and rice.
I'm going to do a baseline blood glucose and ketone reading. I'm going to eat the potatoes. Then I will do blood glucose readings at 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and 2 hours.
When he did his potato test, his baseline blood glucose was 96 milligrams per deciliter.
8:48 a.m. Blood glucose, 96. And here are my potatoes. So I'm on the third one right now. And I'm already getting kind of sick of it. We are at the 1 hour mark. Blood glucose test. 191.
After just 60 minutes of eating the potatoes with the resistant starch, with the process of heating it, letting it cool, reheating it, etc., it went up to 191 milligrams per deciliter.
That is a spike.
That's the highest he's ever seen.
There are 3 drinks that can stop your blood sugar from rising after eating starchy food. So the first thing that you can drink is lemon or lime juice. Either one is fine.
But it will tax your liver and reduce the ATP concentration in hepatic cells. It will also glycate.
When you take acid with your starch, it stops the salivary amylase from working. So the starch doesn't get broken down and you don't get the glucose going into your blood. Another thing that this acid does is that it slows down the rate at which your stomach empties, which means that you feel fuller for longer and you're less likely to snack.
Delaying stomach emptying and filling up on fiber and resistant starch isn't really the best way to go about nourishing yourself. If you're feeling full, eating things that don't contain nutrients, well, how are you going to properly nourish yourself when you don't feel like you have an appetite to nourish yourself?
The second thing you can drink is vinegar. And I'm sure you've heard a lot about apple cider vinegar, vinegar with the mother, raw, filtered, and all that. It really doesn't matter. Any kind of vinegar will work.
Don't drink vinegar, just drink water.
If you're taking vinegar that's raw and unfiltered, that means that it has the mother of vinegar, which acts as a probiotic, which can help if you've got gut issues.
If you've got gut issues, I would really recommend you don't consume things we can't digest. Trust me, I lost my colon in my 20s.
It's just not your bag.
Another thing you can drink is wine.
No, don't drink poisonous acetaldehyde. Drink water.
Yes, wine is a little bit acidic, but there are other ways in which it brings down your blood sugar. When you're not eating, your liver breaks down the carbohydrates that it's stored away to give glucose. It also produces glucose from your protein and your fat. All this is to make sure that your blood sugar never falls below a certain level.
Problem solved. There's no need to eat carbohydrates.
When you drink alcohol, alcohol takes priority over anything else in your liver. So your liver will break down that alcohol first.
Well, it must be our preferred energy source, right?
To reduce the rise in blood sugar you would get from eating starchy food, we'll look at what you can do before you start eating, during your meal, and after your meal.
The weird thing, Lee, is all of this actually proves they know that carbohydrates are a problem because they're doing all these things to mitigate the problems of carbohydrates.
So, what do you do before you start eating? There are several options here. You can take 2 tablespoons of lemon or lime juice or vinegar, put that into half a glass of water, cognac root or psyllium with lots of water, 5 grams of fenugreek powder or 500 milligrams of a fenugreek supplement. Also take 400 milligrams of a Gymnema sylvestre supplement. And finally, you can eat a big plate of vegetables, especially leafy greens, before your meal.
She says to eat leafy greens before your meal because that will help with your blood glucose spikes. But obviously, she's not thinking long term about the fact she'll get some kidney stones.
Now, what do you do while you're eating to make sure that your blood sugar doesn't spike too high? First of all, never eat your carbohydrates naked. Always combine them with protein like meat, fish, eggs, with fat, with fiber like leafy vegetables. Combine them with at least one of these, and if you can, all 3.
The balanced diet. But most people that are sick that I've seen are on a balanced diet.
That's not ridiculous. That's not ridiculous to say that.
For example, if you eat an egg sandwich, the egg has fat and it has protein, and you're combining that with the carbohydrates in the bread.
So she's a big fan of the balanced diet, which means eating carbohydrates and fats. So she's a big fan of eliciting the Randall cycle, which, as we know, this cell will shut off any entry to fats or carbohydrates, and that is not a good thing. Most people call that insulin resistance, but it's not a pathology, it's a physiology.
When you look at your plate, find the food that has the most fiber. That would typically be your vegetables, and you would eat those first. And next you would eat your protein and your fat, which would be your meat, chicken, fish, and so on. And then last of all, you would eat your starchy foods, which would be your rice, potatoes, pasta.
So let's prioritize the food we can't digest first. Or we could consume fatty meat and assimilate all the essential fatty acids, amino acids, and micronutrients.
You don't want to suck all the joy out of eating.
You're kidding, right?
So what do you do after your meal? Within 30 minutes of eating, get active for 10 to 20 minutes. If you can, longer than that. You can walk, you can dance, you can do some kickboxing.
I like making it easy. So I'm going to go out to the garden, I'm going to find these things to put in my water, then I'm going to eat some leafy greens, then I'm going to drink some vinegar, then I'm going to sit down. Oh, hang on a minute, I've got potatoes with the meal. So what I need to do is not eat today.
That's why you need to start thinking about what you're going to eat 1 or 2 days ahead. So you can go through this process of heating and cooling.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So what you got to do is really plan the day before. So what you do is you cook some potatoes, you cook some rice, then you put them in the fridge. Then the next day you'll be able to have the meal. You go out in the garden, get the bits from the garden, put them in the water. Then you have a drink of vinegar. Then you get your leafy greens, eat that before the meal. Then you got your resistant starch from your potatoes and from your rice. You can have that, and then you can go out 30 minutes later, do some kickboxing.
The most important thing is that you should be slightly breathless.
She wants us to get breathless. We've got to be breathless, guys. That's how we know we're doing it right.
So what do you do about snacks? Choose savory rather than sweet. And then drink some vinegar with your snack, either before or within 30 minutes of having that snack.
I've never really seen anybody actually advocate for snacking. Snacking normally is nothing to do with hunger. It's more to do with boredom and maybe giving yourself a bit of a treat. But if you think sugar is so great for the main meals, why are all the snacks not sugary? None of it makes sense.
Next up, the sugar diet really seems to be taking off.
What I think I'm finding on the sugar diet is that it makes me just want to go. I've been doing this for 8 weeks, but there's not a crazy amount of body fat for me to lose. I don't know how far I'll be able to take it before it starts to get too weird.
Quite surprised at Mark. Obviously, he's been a bit hoodwinked into this.
And this is my breakfast. It was actually my breakfast yesterday. But anyway, I had some Sour Patch Kids. I ate 10 or 20 of them, and I ate a couple handfuls of these Starburst jelly beans. I also had 8 ounces of apple juice. During the day, the foods that I'll eat, basically just fruits and vegetables. In this case, I'm showing you guys some candy that I was eating. Again, this is in the absence of fat. If we have fat calories in there as normal, this ain't gonna work.
So the idea around this sugar diet is that we are predominating carbohydrates as our main fuel source. And so we are restricting fats, moderate protein, but we're definitely restricting fats. If we're restricting fats, how are we getting sufficient docosahexaenoic acid, icosapentaenoic acid? These are your omega-3 fatty acids that are essential. How are you going to get enough retinol, K2, D3?
FGF21 is a hormone, I believe, that gets released, and it helps to speed up the metabolism.
The strange thing is he mentions FGF21, the molecule there, which he wants to increase and manipulate. Of course, if you want to increase that, the best thing to do is restrict carbohydrates.
Fruits that I mainly eat are raspberries, blueberries, blackberries. So a lot of berries. I'll also eat, I don't know, 1, 2, or 3 bananas in a day, depending on the day.
If you eat 1 banana, you'll get a certain insulin response. And if you eat 3 bananas, you won't get 3 times the insulin response, but you will get about 2 times the insulin response. Again, this is a thing called insulin stacking. The best thing to do is to not eat any bananas.
I'll eat quite a bit of oranges, apples, just a lot of fruit. I've been eating a lot of dates. 5, 6, 7 p.m. is when I eat my proteins. My proteins are very lean sources of protein. 99% lean turkey, 93.7 lean ground beef.
People don't seem to really be giving this a lot of thought when they're so quick to replace fats with carbohydrates. It's not as simple as one fuel source for another fuel source. One fuel source has more electrons, has more nutrition. We run better on fats. We produce more ATP using fats. And a lot of these sugar dieters now, they're not only eating things like Sour Patch Kids, but they're consuming lots of fruit juice, oranges out of season, bananas out of season, super high in fructose, glucose, indigestible fiber, and deuterium.
What I'm trying to do with it is I am trying to train my insulin sensitivity.
Mark wants to make his insulin more sensitive, and yet is eating things that elicit a big insulin response.